You know what nobody wants to admit? The moment you stop begging for his attention, the moment you finally said enough and started walking, that's the exact moment he started paying attention. And if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever watched someone suddenly show up after you stop chasing them, then you already know what this video is about. But here's what I want you to really sit with today, because this goes so much deeper than just playing hard to get or making him miss you. What we're actually talking about is one of the most profound psychological truths in human relationships. The idea that in many cases, a man will not truly value what he has until he feels the very real, very credible possibility that he could lose it. And I know that sounds harsh. I know some of you are thinking, well, if he loved me, he wouldn't need me to walk away to respect me. And you're partially right. But stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand not just why this happens, but what it reveals about him, about you, and about what needs to change, not as a game, not as manipulation, but as an act of genuine self-respect that transforms the entire dynamic of a relationship. I welcome Love Psychology Secrets, the channel where we don't do surface level dating advice. We go deep, we go real. If you're into relationship psychology, understanding human behavior, and becoming the best version of yourself in love and in life, then hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like if anything I say today connects with you. It genuinely helps more people find this content, and this is exactly the kind of conversation more people need to have. All right, let's get into it. Here's the thing that most people get completely wrong about this topic. When you hear he doesn't respect you until you walk away, the immediate assumption is that this is advice. Like someone is telling you to walk away as a strategy. And when people frame it that way, it sounds cold, it sounds calculated, it sounds like you're playing chess with someone's emotions, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we're actually exploring is a pattern, a psychological pattern that shows up over and over again in relationships. And understanding why it happens is far more powerful than any tactic you could ever use. Because when you understand why respect often doesn't show up until the relationship is on the line, you start to see what's really going on beneath the surface, in his psychology, in the relationship dynamic, and honestly, in yourself. And that understanding, that's what actually changes things. Not the walking away itself, but what the walking away represents. Okay? So let's break this down piece by piece, because there are several angles to this that most people never consider. Let's start with the foundation. And this is something I want you to really absorb, because everything else builds on this. Respect and love are not the same thing. I'll say that again. Respect and love are not the same thing. A man can genuinely love you, feel real deep feelings for you, and still not respect you in the way your relationship requires. These two things operate on completely different psychological frequencies. Love is emotional, it's felt. It often develops naturally through proximity, attraction, shared experiences, chemistry. But respect is built. It's earned and it's maintained through consistent signals. Signals about who you are, what you stand for, and what you will and will not accept. And here's where so many women get hurt. They assume that because he loves them, respect will naturally follow. They think love automatically includes respect. But that's not how it works. Especially not in the early and middle stages of a relationship, and especially not with certain types of men. A man can adore you and still take you for granted. He can miss you when you're gone and still not make you a priority when you're present. He can feel butterflies around you and still scroll through his phone when you're trying to have a serious conversation. Love and respect are two separate things. You need both. And if you're only getting one, the relationship has a real significant problem. Think about it like this. Imagine you run a business and you have a client who absolutely loves your service. They rave about it, they tell their friends, they say you're the best in the business. But then they start calling you at midnight. They start demanding rush jobs with no extra pay. They start canceling last minute and rescheduling at their convenience, assuming you'll always be available because, well, you always have been. Now, do they love your service? Yes. Do they respect your time, your boundaries, your professional standards? No. And what usually happens in that situation? If you keep accommodating everything without any pushback, they keep taking more. But the moment you say, actually, I can't do midnight calls anymore, and here's my cancellation policy, suddenly they recalibrate. Suddenly they start treating you differently because now there's a real cost to taking you for granted. That dynamic, that's not unique to business. That's human psychology. And it plays out in relationships every single day. Now, I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This is not me saying men are bad. This is not some all men are users take. This is me acknowledging that human beings, men and women, are wired to naturally take less effort with things that require no effort from us. It's not malicious. In most cases, it's not even conscious. It's just psychology. When something is always available, always accessible, always right there, the brain stops signaling urgency around it. Urgency is what drives attention. It's what drives action. It's what drives investment. And without that urgency, even someone who deeply cares about you can slip into complacency without even realizing it. So when I say he doesn't respect you until you walk away, what I'm really pointing to is this. The act of walking away, or even genuinely preparing to, is often the first time a man truly registers the weight of what he has. The first time urgency enters the picture, and that changes everything. Now let's talk about the specific dynamics that create this pattern, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are usually very specific things happening in a relationship when this shows up. The first and most common is what I call the availability trap. And listen, this one is important because it's probably the most painful to hear, but it's also the most immediately actionable. The availability trap happens when you become so consistently, unconditionally available to someone that your presence stops feeling valuable to them. Not because you're not valuable, but because your availability has communicated something different. Think about this carefully. In the early stages of a relationship, most people feel something called earned access. There's effort involved. There's a little uncertainty. There's some investment required just to spend time together. And that process of investment, of putting in effort, of navigating the uncertainty is actually what creates psychological value in the brain. There's research on this, and it connects to something called the IKEA effect, the finding that we value things more when we've put effort into them. We literally assign more worth to things we've worked for, even when the objective quality is identical to something we didn't work for. Now translate that into relationships. When a man has to invest to earn your time, your attention, your energy, when there's some level of effort required, his brain naturally starts to assign higher value to the relationship. But when everything is freely available with no reciprocal effort required, the brain responds differently. Not cruelly, just naturally. And what happens next is that he starts giving less effort because less effort is required. And you start giving more effort to compensate, which only deepens the trap. And then one day you realize you're running on empty, giving everything, and getting very little in return. That's the availability trap in full motion. I was working with someone recently, let's call her Maya. Maya came to me because she was exhausted. She'd been with her partner for 2 years and she felt completely invisible in the relationship. She was the one planning dates, initiating conversations, checking in on him, keeping the emotional connection alive. He wasn't unkind to her. He wasn't seeing someone else. He just wasn't showing up. And when she'd bring it up, he'd say, I'm just not that expressive. I show love differently. Sound familiar? Maya had become so available, so accommodating, so understanding of all his reasons that he had genuinely stopped registering that there was a problem. He wasn't happy to be getting away with it, he just didn't see it. And here's what happened. After our conversations, Maya made a decision, not as a game, but as an authentic act of self-respect. She stopped over-functioning. She stopped initiating. She gave him space not to manipulate him, but because she genuinely needed to stop pouring from an empty cup. Within 10 days, his behavior shifted noticeably. He reached out, he initiated a conversation, he noticed something was different and actually asked about it. The urgency returned because the certainty of her endless availability had been interrupted. Now, the story doesn't end there. They had real work to do, and they did it. But the shift started the moment she stopped being trapped by her own availability. The second dynamic is what I want to call the boundary vacuum. And this connects to something really important about what respect actually is. Respect isn't just a feeling. Respect is a behavioral response to perceived value and perceived limits. In other words, people don't just respect you because they care about you. They respect you because you have shown them through your actions, your consistency, your choices, where your limits are, and that you take them seriously. Now, in relationships that lack clear, consistently enforced boundaries, something predictable happens. The partner with fewer visible limits gradually becomes the one who accommodates more, compromises more, accepts more. And over time, that accommodation gets normalized. What started as generosity starts to look like a lack of standards. And a lack of visible standards communicates, again, not intentionally, just psychologically, that certain behaviors are acceptable. The boundary vacuum creates a space where disrespect can grow, even in the absence of bad intentions. And here's the counterintuitive part. Men, not all men, but many, actually feel more secure and more genuinely respectful in relationships where the woman has clear, visible standards. Not because they like to be controlled, but because standards communicate self-worth. And a woman with self-worth is someone a man's psychology recognizes as high value. I've talked to men about this. I've had long, honest conversations about what makes a man start to take a relationship seriously. And over again, the answer that comes up is some version of, I started taking her seriously when I realized she took herself seriously. Think about what that means. His respect for her followed her respect for herself. And in many cases, the clearest signal of self-respect is a visible limit, a genuine, credible point at which you are willing to walk. Now, I want to pause here and address something directly because some of you are probably thinking, but Stephen, I have communicated my standards. I've had the conversations. I've expressed what I need and nothing changed. And if that's you, I hear you, and this matters. There is a crucial difference between communicating your standards and demonstrating them. A lot of people are experts at expressing their boundaries verbally. They can articulate exactly what they need, exactly what's not working, exactly what they want the relationship to look like, and none of it lands. And the reason, painful as this is that words without demonstrated follow-through lose their weight over time. If you said, I won't tolerate this 15 times, and tolerated it 15 times, the statement has been functionally overridden by the behavior. He doesn't hear, I won't tolerate this as a limit anymore. He hears it as an expression of frustration that will resolve itself. I'm not blaming you for this. Most people do this out of love, out of hope, out of a genuine desire to make things work without reaching a point of no return. But the pattern is still the pattern. And the only thing that actually changes it is consistent, real action that matches the words. That's when the dynamic shifts. Let me take this even deeper because there's a third dimension to this that most relationship advice completely skips over. And this is the one I find the most fascinating. It's the mirror dynamic. The idea that the way a man treats you in a relationship is often a reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. Now, I don't mean that in a victim blaming way. I'm not saying if he disrespects you, it's your fault. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that our self-relationship, how we talk to ourselves, what we believe we deserve, what we're willing to accept, radiates outward. It shows in how we carry ourselves. It shows in the choices we make. It shows in what we allow and what we walk away from. And the people around us, especially intimate partners, respond to those signals whether they're conscious of it or not. Think about two people walking into a room. One person carries themselves with quiet confidence. They're warm, they're engaged, but there's something about them that communicates, I know my worth. I don't need your validation to feel good about myself. The other person is warm and generous, but subtly telegraphs, I need this to work. I need you to like me. I'll adjust, I'll accommodate, I'll make this comfortable for you. Both people can be equally kind, equally intelligent, equally beautiful, but they generate completely different responses from the people around them, not because of what they said, because of what they radiated. And in romantic relationships, that radiation is everything. A woman who deeply, genuinely knows her worth doesn't need to play games. She doesn't need tactics because her natural way of moving through a relationship communicates value. And that communication generates respect automatically. This is why walking away works when it works. Not as a trick, but as an expression of something real. The women who walk away and see genuine, lasting change are not the ones who walked away strategically to trigger a response. They're the ones who walked away because they actually reached a point of inner clarity, a point where they genuinely valued themselves more than they feared losing him. And that internal shift changes everything. It changes how they carry themselves. It changes what they accept when he comes back. It changes the entire dynamic of the relationship because something fundamental has changed inside them. The walking away is the symptom. The self-respect is the cure. All right, let's talk about the fourth angle because this one is where a lot of people get confused, and I want to clarify it. There is a difference between a man who doesn't respect you because he's never been shown that he needs to, and a man who genuinely doesn't respect you as a person. These are not the same thing, and confusing them leads to a lot of wasted time and a lot of unnecessary pain. The first type, let's call him the complacent man, is someone who genuinely cares about you, but has gradually drifted into taking you for granted. He's not a bad person. He hasn't made some conscious decision to disrespect you. He's just fallen into comfort, into routine, into the assumption that things will continue as they are. This man, when confronted with the real possibility of losing you, often wakes up, often recalibrates, often becomes more present, more attentive, more intentional. The shift is real. And if the underlying foundation of the relationship is solid, if there's genuine love, genuine compatibility, genuine effort once he's fully awake, then working through it can lead to something much stronger on the other side. But then there's a second type, and please hear me on this. The second type is the man who knows exactly what he's doing. He's not complacent, he's calculated. He knows that you love him, and he uses that as leverage to get what he wants without fully reciprocating. He dismisses your concerns not out of obliviousness, but out of indifference or control. He makes you feel like your standards are the problem, like your emotional needs are too much, like you're asking for things that are unreasonable. He might come back after you walk away, yes, but not because of a genuine internal shift. He comes back because your absence was inconvenient, because he hasn't found someone to replace your role yet, because he wants to restore his access to you. And if you go back without real, sustained change in behavior, not just promises, you'll find yourself right back in the same place within weeks, sometimes days. This man doesn't need to be awakened. He needs to stay walked away from permanently. And learning to tell the difference between these two types, that is one of the most critical skills you can develop in your relationship life. I want to tell you about another situation I worked through with someone because it illustrates this distinction perfectly. There was a woman, I'll call her Priya, who was in a relationship with a man who checked all the complacent man boxes initially. He'd drift, she'd express hurt, he'd pull back further, she'd try harder. Classic pattern. When she finally reached a genuine breaking point and began to genuinely detach, not theatrically, but authentically, he responded. He called. He asked to talk. He said things she'd been wanting to hear for months, and she came back. And for about 3 weeks, things were different. He was attentive, present, engaged, and then gradually, the old patterns returned. She walked again. Same response. Same 3 weeks of change. Same gradual return to old behavior. By the third time, she told me, Stephen, I think I've been mistaking the panic of losing me for actual growth. And she was right. His repeated pattern of reactive change followed by backsliding was the data she needed. That wasn't a man being woken up. That was a man managing a situation. And the moment Priya understood that distinction, she made a final decision that she never reversed. And within 8 months, she was in a relationship with someone who didn't require her to walk away to earn basic respect, because she had upgraded her own standards from the inside out. Now let's talk about something that often gets ignored in this conversation. What walking away actually does to you, not to him, to you. Because here's a truth that I want you to carry with you. The most powerful thing about the decision to walk away from a relationship that isn't working isn't what it does to the dynamic with him. It's what it does to your relationship with yourself. Every time you stay past the point where you should go, every time you accept less than what you've already said you deserve, you send a message to your own subconscious. That message says, what I want doesn't really matter enough to act on. My words don't have to match my actions. And over time, that erodes something very precious, your own sense of self-trust. You start to doubt your own instincts. You start to question whether your needs are reasonable. You start to negotiate with your own worth. And that erosion is what makes you stay in situations that are clearly wrong for you, even when you can see it clearly from the outside. On the other hand, when you make the decision to walk away from something that isn't serving you, when you put action behind your words, even when it's terrifying, even when you love him, even when part of you is hoping he'll stop you, you rebuild that self-trust. You prove to yourself that you mean what you say. And that self-trust, once rebuilt, changes how you show up not just in this relationship, but in every relationship, every interaction, every room you walk into. There's a reason women who have genuinely walked away from unhealthy relationships and stayed walked away often describe the experience as one of the most empowering things they've ever done. Not because they wanted to be alone, but because they discovered in real and concrete terms that they could choose themselves. And that discovery changes a person at a fundamental level. Let's talk about the fifth angle now, because I don't want to leave this as purely emotional territory. There's a practical, actionable side to this, and I want to make it real and specific. What does it actually look like to build the kind of self-respect in a relationship that generates genuine respect from a partner before things reach a point of walking away? Because ideally, you never need to get to that place. Ideally, the respect is present from the beginning. And the way you build that from the start is through something I call the 3 C's: clarity, consistency, and composure. Clarity is about knowing and being willing to communicate what your actual standards are. Not just the big obvious things like don't cheat on me, but the everyday things that tell you whether you're being valued. Does he show up when he says he will? Does he make future plans that demonstrate you're a fixture in his life? Does he engage with your emotional world, not just your physical presence? Does he take your concerns seriously rather than dismissing or minimizing them? Clarity means knowing your answers to those questions and being honest with yourself when the answers are consistently no. Consistency is about making sure your actions match your standards over time. Not perfectly, nobody is perfect, but directionally. If you've communicated that something is a deal breaker and it happens again without consequence, you've sent a signal. Consistency is what gives your words their weight. It's what transforms a stated value into a demonstrated value. And demonstrated values are what a partner actually responds to. Composure is the one people sleep on, and it might be the most powerful of the 3. Composure is the ability to express your needs and your limits from a place of calm certainty rather than emotional desperation. There's a very different energy between please don't do this, I can't handle it when you act this way, and I need you to understand that this is not something I'm going to continue accepting. The first communicates need and vulnerability. And while vulnerability has its place, leading with emotional desperation consistently undermines your position. The second communicates self-possession, certainty. The sense that you're not asking permission to be treated well, you're simply stating what's real. That composure, that calm, grounded, non-reactive place is deeply powerful in a relationship. And it comes from having done the inner work to genuinely know your worth, not just to intellectually believe it. Now, I want to address the men who are watching this, because this conversation is about all of us. Gentlemen, if you're in a relationship where your partner has become distant, withdrawn, less available than she used to be, and especially if she started having more serious conversations about where things are going, I want you to hear this. That's not her being difficult. That's not her playing games. That's her reaching a point of genuine fatigue with a dynamic that isn't working for her. And the window to respond with something real is often smaller than men realize. Here's the mistake a lot of men make. They interpret a woman's withdrawal as manipulation. They dig in. They become less communicative, less present, more defensive, because they don't want to feel like they're being controlled or leveraged. And I understand that instinct. Nobody wants to feel like their behavior is being managed by someone else's emotional state. But here's what's actually happening in most cases. She is not withdrawing to control you. She is withdrawing because she is trying to find herself again in a dynamic that has required too much of her. And if you respond to that genuine withdrawal with more distance, more silence, more "I'll wait for her to come around," you may be waiting for something that's already gone. The men who respond well in these moments are the ones who can set aside their ego long enough to ask themselves honestly, have I actually been showing up the way this relationship deserves? Not to perform an answer, to genuinely examine it. Because that kind of honest self-reflection, that willingness to actually look at your own behavior without defensiveness, is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of emotional maturity that makes a man genuinely worth coming back to. And there's something else I want men to understand. When she walks away, when it's real, when she's not waiting at the door, the instinct is often to immediately try to win her back, to flood her with attention, with grand gestures, with all the things she's been asking for. And sometimes that's genuine, and sometimes it's just discomfort at the loss of her presence. The question worth sitting with is, what would it look like to change, not because I'm scared of losing her, but because I've actually recognized that she deserves better? Because that's the change that lasts. That's the change that she'll feel the difference of when you come back. The reactive change, the panic response, is transparent. The internal change, the kind that comes from genuine self-examination, that's what actually rebuilds trust. Let's get into something that sits underneath all of this. Something that gets at why this pattern exists at all. And it connects to how most of us are wired around what psychologists call loss aversion. Studies have consistently shown that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. We feel losses more intensely than we feel gains. This is a universal human tendency, and it has massive implications for relationships. It means that the good things you bring to someone's life every single day, your warmth, your effort, your presence, your support, your emotional investment, those things, while genuinely valuable, generate a baseline of positive experience that the brain begins to normalize. The brain adapts. What was once felt as a wonderful addition to his life becomes the baseline expectation of what the relationship is. And because it's been normalized, it generates less active appreciation over time. But the moment that baseline is threatened, The moment there's a real possibility of losing it, the brain activates in a completely different way. Now the loss aversion system kicks in. Now the value of what he's been taking for granted becomes vivid and urgent in a way it wasn't before. That is the psychology underneath. He didn't appreciate what he had until it was gone. It's not unique to relationships. It's not unique to men. It's the way human brains are wired to assign value and respond to threat. Understanding this doesn't excuse complacency, but it explains it. An explanation is the beginning of addressing it, in how you structure your relationship, in what signals you consistently send, in how you maintain a sense of your own independent value as a person separate from the relationship. Which brings me to one of the most important practical insights I want to leave you with: the importance of having a life. I know that sounds almost too simple, but I'm going to tell you some of the most consistent patterns I've seen in relationships where one person gradually loses the other's respect involve a specific thing: the gradual disappearance of the person's independent life. Their friendships fade, their hobbies get shelved, their goals get quietly deprioritized. Their world slowly contracts to the dimensions of the relationship. And this happens out of love. It happens because they're invested, because they're committed, because they want to be present. But what it does unintentionally is it removes the sense of independence, the aliveness, the self-directedness that made them attractive to begin with. Think about the version of you that he fell for. Were you someone with your own world, with your own pursuits, with your own friendships and passions and goals? I would bet that you were. And that independent aliveness is not something to trade away for closeness. It's something to maintain as a non-negotiable, because it's not just what makes you attractive, it's what keeps you whole. A person with a full, rich, self-directed life has an entirely different energy in a relationship than a person whose world has shrunk to the size of their partner. They're less anxious, less reactive, less easily hurt by small inconsistencies, and they're more naturally confident, more naturally engaging, more naturally the kind of presence that generates genuine respect and desire. Not because they're trying to, but because they're genuinely alive to their own life. So if you're sitting here thinking about a relationship dynamic that isn't working, the question I want you to ask yourself isn't just, what should I say to him about this? The question is, who am I apart from this relationship? And if the honest answer is that you're not quite sure anymore, if the relationship has quietly become the center of your identity rather than one important part of a full life, then the work that needs to happen isn't about him at all. It's about rebuilding yourself, reconnecting with your own desires, your own friendships, your own dreams, your own sense of direction. And when you do that work genuinely, not as a tactic, the shift in the relationship dynamic often follows naturally. Not always. Sometimes the relationship is simply wrong, but at least you'll know either way from a place of fullness rather than from a place of fear. I want to bring this home now because we've covered a lot of ground, and I want to make sure you leave this with something real and concrete to take forward. The truth at the center of everything we've talked about today is this: respect in a relationship is not something that arrives automatically with love. It is something that is built and maintained through consistent signals about your own value, your own standards, and your own willingness to honor them, even when it's hard. The walking away when it's real and necessary is not a tactic, it's a consequence. It's the natural outcome of a person who has fully, genuinely decided that they will not continue to accept less than what they deserve. And that decision, made from the inside out, from a place of real self-knowledge, is what changes dynamics. Sometimes it changes him. Sometimes it clarifies that he was never going to change, which is equally valuable information. But it always changes you. And that change, the deepening of your own self-respect, the rebuilding of your self-trust, the rediscovery of your own value as a person independent of any relationship, that is the real gift inside the walk. So here's what I want you to take with you. Before you think about what to say to him, think about what you truly believe about yourself. Before you figure out how to get him to treat you differently, figure out whether you are treating yourself with the same level of respect you're asking from him. And if the honest answer to that question is no, if you've been accommodating things you never should have accommodated, accepting things you know you shouldn't accept, staying past the point where you knew you should leave, then the work starts there. Not in a conversation with him, in a decision about yourself. The most powerful thing you can do in any relationship is become so deeply rooted in your own worth that the idea of accepting disrespect, any disrespect from anyone, simply stops being an option you consider. When you get there, the dynamic changes. Sometimes with him, always with you, and always for the better. I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, have you experienced this? Have you ever walked away from something genuinely and watched the dynamic shift? Or maybe you're right in the middle of it right now and you're trying to figure out what to do. Share your experience below, because this community is one of the most thoughtful, self-aware communities on the internet, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this video resonated with you, give it a like. It genuinely helps this content reach the people who need it most. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We go deep here every time. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next.